At 17, Daniel Reeves learned the truth about his family on the coldest night of the year.
You want to argue? Then argue with the snow. I am done.
The heavy wooden door slammed shut, and the bolt drove home with a finality that echoed louder than the wind.
The mine. It's the only place left.
On the ridge above town, an abandoned silver mine sat dark and silent, a red arrow fading on the rock.
10 degrees. Maybe 15. No coat, no gloves. Just keep moving.
The mine's black mouth swallowed the sky, and he stepped into a silence heavier than the cold.
A death trap, they called it. But right now, it was the only door that would open.
Inside, the darkness was complete. The wind outside became a muffled roar, and in the house behind him, Vernon poured a whiskey and waited for the morning.
It's not colder in here. It's warmer.
He pressed his palm to the rock wall. The stone was alive with heat. Stumbling deeper, he followed a trickle of meltwater to a dry side chamber.
This isn't just shelter. This is a furnace.
But the entrance was a gaping wound, and the storm was pressing in.
Have to seal it now.
He dragged rotted timbers and slabs of rock, piling them into the opening until the wind became a whisper. In the sudden quiet, the rock walls still radiated warmth. Not hot, but constant.
The old-timers always said this mine was cursed. Maybe they just never listened to the stone.
He pulled his thin coat around himself, sank against the warm stone, and let the dark hold him. Morning was still far away. When dawn broke, he didn't wake to cold. He woke to the strange sensation of sweat on his brow.
This mine isn't just a refuge. It's an engine, if I can find tools.
Deeper in the drift, his hands closed on rusted iron, a stove, a pick, a lantern half full of oil.
Same as a cabin, just buried in stone. I can make this work.
Over the next 2 days, he hewed fresh timber, hung a heavy fur blanket over the entrance, and mortared a chimney from loose rock outside. The ground froze solid enough to ring like iron under a hammer. Inside, the stone held steady at 52 degrees.
The stove just takes the edge off. The real warmth is free.
In town, they traded rumors over high-collared coats, the crazy boy in the death trap, surely dead by now.
Let them think I am dead. For now, that's what I need.
He sat before his tiny stove, patchwork coat, steaming, and watched the firelight dance on walls that had once known only dark. In the days that followed, he mapped the mine's arteries, and in a side drift, the temperature dropped.
50 degrees. Maybe lower. Dry as a bone. This is a larder.
He hung strips of venison over his stovepipe, the smoke curling into the dark before the chimney drew it out.
Whatever roots the frost didn't kill, whatever game wandered too close, I'll store it all.
Above ground, the town shrank into its collar. Wagons stopped, gossip flowed, and a name surfaced. The dead boy in the mine. Vernon Hargrove, safe in his warm kitchen, told anyone who asked that the boy had always been wild, always a liar.
They'll say anything to bury what they did. Let the rumors freeze in the drifts.
Jars of preserved berries, a sack of dried beans, a crock of salted meat. His larder looked less like survival and more like a plan.
The world up there wants me dead. Down here, the earth hasn't given up on me yet.
But at night, when the stove burned low, the silence pressed in, and he could feel the mountain's weight and his own smallness inside it. A week of silence drove him deeper. The lamp edged along a forgotten side cut the maps had missed.
Someone wanted this tunnel buried. Why?
At the end of the drift, a rough door bore 3 faint words in flaking paint. Assay office. The rusted lock gave after 3 blows with the pick, and he stepped into 60 winters of dust. Inside, a gutted stove, a tilted desk, and a cabinet still crammed with yellowed papers.
No one has touched this for decades. Hidden on purpose.
He lifted a sheet headed silver assay, saw a figure that made his hand tremble. 11 ounces to the ton. And a smeared stamp disputed.
That's not just a strike. That's a small fortune, and someone fought to stop it.
Beneath the assay lay a folded map, a penciled vein tracing through the deeper rock. Scribbled at the edge, DRS.
DRS. Daniel Reeves, Sr. My father didn't just work this mine. He owned it.
For 2 days, he barely moved from the office, piecing together the half-buried story.
The assay, 11 ounces per ton. That vein was never worked. They shut it down.
The smeared stamp didn't just say disputed. A scribbled margin note gave the names: V. Haight Hargrove, claimant. Witness, F. Reeves.
V. Hargrove. Vernon. And Frank Reeves, my own uncle, signed as witness.
The dispute was a lie. The mine went dormant while the Hargroves took the house and land.
They didn't just kick me out. They stole my birthright and buried the proof.
Rage flushed up his neck, but he didn't scream. He laid the papers flat and pressed his forehead to the cold stone. When he finally sat before his stove that night, the documents sat beside him, a claim older than the house on the hill.
I can't prove it without the deed. But the truth is here, and so am I.
The mine that had been a death trap was now the only courtroom he had, and winter was still far from over. He returned to the office before dawn, pick in hand, and tapped the wall behind the desk until a stone shifted. Behind the loose stone, a rusted lockbox. The lid groaned open. Inside, a tarnished pocket watch, a photograph, and a single folded document bearing an official seal.
A deed. Silver Lode Mine, patented claim. Holder, Daniel Reeves, Sr., transferable to sole heir.
Beneath the deed, a handwritten will clause from his father. To my son Daniel, I leave the mine and all its clearings.
He didn't just mean for me to survive. He left me the keys to the kingdom.
He sat with the deed and assay laid across his knees, proof of ownership, proof of wealth, and proof of betrayal.
Vernon probably thinks I froze to death in a ditch. He has no idea I'm holding his ruin.
But as he gazed at the paper, the silence deepened. Outside, the wind had stopped. The air pressed against the mountain like a held breath. The worst winter in a generation was about to arrive, and it would reach everyone, even the men who had cast him out. The blizzard struck with a violence no one had seen in 30 years. Snow fell sideways, and the valley groaned. Inside his cabin, Frank Reeves pressed a palm to the cracking ceiling and knew the roof would not hold.
I should have stood up to Vernon. Now the boy's dead, and my own roof is caving.
He sent his wife to a neighbor's, then wrapped a blanket over his face and stepped into the white wall. Every step was a gamble. He couldn't see the trail, but he knew the ridgeline by heart and the red arrow on the mine. Inside the mine, Daniel heard the first thump through the timber. Then a muffled voice calling his name.
Daniel, it's Frank. I know what I did. Please, let me in.
Daniel looked at the deed still clutched in his fingers, and the name of the man who had witnessed the theft.
He didn't throw me out, but he let it happen. Now he wants my mercy.
The pounding faded. Frank slid to his knees in the drift, his breath freezing against the frozen fur curtain. The fur curtain tore back, and Daniel's hand locked onto Frank's collar, dragging him into the amber glow. He dropped him by the stove. Frank's lips were blue, his words a slurry of half-frozen pleas. Once the shivering stopped, Daniel laid the smeared assay report on the crate between them.
You recognize this, Uncle. Your signature's on it. Witness for Vernon's lie.
I didn't want to. Vernon said he'd ruin us both. I watched your father walk into that drift and never come out. I kept quiet for years. When he threw you out, I told myself you'd find a way. I told myself it wasn't my fight.
This mine is mine. Not just by right, by law. I hold the deed. My father's will is sealed inside that box.
Frank stared at the deed, then slowly slid off the crate to his knees, his forehead touching the cold stone floor.
You'll write down the truth. Every name, every date. When the storm breaks, you'll swear to it before a judge.
Frank nodded, unable to speak. Outside, the blizzard screamed louder, and somewhere in the white, Vernon's house was failing too. In Vernon Hargrove's house, a 30-year-old roof beam groaned once and split. He threw himself through the back door just as the parlor collapsed under 10 tons of snow. In the swirling dark, he found half-filled footprints, Frank's tracks, leading straight toward the ridge. The mine, no calculation, no pride, just the arithmetic of a body losing heat at 40 miles an hour of wind. He fell against the timbered entrance and pounded until the frozen wood bloodied his knuckles.
Open the door. I know you are in there, boy.
Inside, Daniel heard a voice he never expected to hear again, the one that had slammed a door in his face.
He came to the only door that would open. Just like me.
Frank looked up from the stove, face ashen. Daniel pulled the fur aside a hand's breadth, and there stood Vernon Hargrove, wrapped in a frozen coat, eyes wild with a desperation he had never shown the boy he cast out. Daniel pulled the curtain wide and yanked Vernon inside, dropping a heavy timber brace across the entrance. He thrust the deed and assay report into Vernon's half-frozen hands.
Read it. Read what you stole and who it belongs to.
That can't be. Your father died without signing it over.
He signed it in his will. That's his handwriting. The seal is real. It's done.
Vernon's eyes moved across the page, and his hands began to tremble.
You are alive by my mercy. This mine is mine. The vein is mine. Say it.
It's yours.
The three of them sank onto crates around the stove, the storm howling at the sealed entrance, a heavy silence between them. The boy they cast out now held the deed, the mine, and the lives of the men who had betrayed him. The blizzard hammered the mountain for 2 more days, a ceaseless roar that made the rock itself seem fragile. Inside, the thermometer Daniel had salvaged never dropped below 52 degrees.
The stone does what the surface cannot. It keeps its promises.
I never believed this place could save us. No one in town did.
Daniel fed the stove sparingly, each log measured, while the other 2 men watched like debtors.
They're counting every log, wondering if I'll run out before dawn.
But the chimney breathed cleanly, and no snow forced through the timber seal. The mine held.
Thank you, Daniel, for letting us in. I know I don't deserve it.
Vernon said nothing, his eyes fixed on the larder door, the food he had no right to. Outside, the world had vanished. But inside the old death trap, 3 men, and an unforgivable truth, waited out the winter. On the 3rd dawn, the wind finally died. The silence that filled the drift was deeper than the roar had ever been. Daniel tore the brace free and shoved the frozen curtain aside. A wall of white light poured in.
The earth held. Time to see what it buried.
The valley was a sea of blinding white. Roofs, fences, roads, all gone. Only the mine portal stood clear.
No one's coming up here. The world has to dig itself out first. When the thaw comes, I am reopening this mine. The vein in that assay is still down there. You can work for wages, or you can walk when the snow melts. Those are the terms.
I'll work. I don't have a roof, Daniel. I'll do whatever you need.
Vernon said nothing. But after a long silence, he gave a single, graveled nod. The boy they kicked into a blizzard now owned the mountain, and they had nowhere else to go. As the snow began its slow retreat, the mine became a worksite. Daniel assigned tasks like a foreman.
11 ounces a ton. This isn't just survival money. This vein could keep us for years.
It's the same assay my father found. We follow the map he drew. We break through to that drift.
Vernon kept his back to the conversation, splitting logs with a fury that served no one.
He hates it, but he hasn't run. That's more than I expected.
Daniel carved a plank from a fallen timber and painted 4 words with a stiff brush. Riva's load. He hung it above the mine entrance, beside the faded red arrow that had once marked a death trap.
Your father would have liked that. He said this mine had a name before Hargrove stole it.
Then it will carry his name again, and we'll pull silver out of the same stone they tried to bury.
The old death trap had a new name, and 3 men, bound by blood and betrayal, began the slow, uneasy work of a future none of them deserved. 1 month after the snow turned to slush, Daniel called them to a fire built on the clearing outside the mine. He held a small leather book.
My father kept a journal. I found it in the lockbox with the deed. You need to hear what he wrote.
He opened it to a page marked with a folded corner and began to read aloud by the firelight.
V. Hargrove and F. Reeves came today. They say I am dead in law. They mean to take the mine.
Frank's head dropped between his shoulders. Vernon's fists curled until the knuckles whitened.
I have hidden the deed and will. If they succeed, my son will have nothing unless he finds the office.
Daniel closed the book. The fire cracked. Neither man raised his eyes.
This journal proves conspiracy. I could take it to the recorder tomorrow and see you both in irons, but I won't. Not unless you give me no choice. The mine keeps working, and the journal stays in my chest.
He looked at both men, 1 blood, 1 law, and let the silence carry the weight of what he'd chosen not to do. By the time the last snow melted, Daniel walked into town with a crisp shirt and a deed folded in his pocket. At the claims office, he placed the old document on the counter. The seal cracked, but still legible. The clerk stared, adjusted his spectacles, and reached for the record book without a word.
He's probably waiting for Vernon to burst in and contest it, but he won't.
The quill scratched for a long minute. Then the clerk stamped the transfer and slid a fresh certificate across the wood.
Daniel Reeves, Jr., sole owner of the Silver Lode mine. It's on the books now.
By noon, the gossip had spread. The boy they called dead walked into town and proved he owned the mountain. Daniel walked back up the ridge without looking left or right, the paper a quiet weight against his chest. The mine, strengthened, signposted, and registered, was no longer a hideout. It was an address.
17, and I own a mountain. This is what he wanted for me.
Within a week of registration, the first pick struck the vein exactly where the old map promised.
There it is, Daniel. 4 inches of solid argentite. Your father put us right on top of it.
Frank took over the face, his miner's hands remembering what they'd once done for wages. Vernon was assigned the cart and the sledge. Day after day, the dull ring of steel on stone filled the drift, and the ore cart grew heavy.
He's not complaining, just swinging the hammer. That's new.
Every evening, Daniel weighed the day's take on a small brass scale his father had left behind.
2 pounds of high grade. Enough to buy supplies for a month and still put money aside.
We're not just surviving. We're building something.
Vernon said nothing, but he stacked the silver bars with a care that looked almost like pride.
17, and I own a mountain, and a silver vein that's already paying. He didn't just leave me a roof. He left me a foundation.
One evening, as the sun bled gold across the valley, Daniel climbed to the ridge above the mine. He carried a small leather journal, not his father's, but one he'd started himself.
I never wrote down the night he locked the door. Maybe I should.
He opened the cover and began to scratch a few lines by the fading light.
The stone never forgot its warmth. It just waited for someone who needed it.
Below, Frank and Vernon moved slowly around the mine, small figures in the amber glow. He looked past them, toward the distant town that had written him off.
They called it a death trap. They were right. It It just wasn't mine.
He closed the journal, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The boy they kicked out had built a home from their worst fear, and spring was only the beginning. The next evening, Daniel found Frank alone by the fire and sat beside him without speaking.
I have something that belongs to you.
That's my father's watch. I gave it to your dad the day he filed the claim. He said it would keep time for the both of us.
Frank's voice cracked. The watch sat in his palm, smaller than he remembered.
He'd want you to have it back.
The old miner pressed the watch to his chest and wept, the first honest tears he'd shed in years. Daniel didn't reach out. He just waited until the sobs quieted. Across the clearing, Vernon stood in the shadow of the timbers, watching. He did not approach.
Maybe I can't forget, but I can let this much go.
No grand forgiveness was spoken, but something heavy had shifted, and the silence that followed was lighter than before. Midsummer, the Reeves lode shipped its first silver. A merchant arrived with a heavy purse. They struck the deal on the old brass scale. Silver bars for supplies.
I never thought I'd see payroll here. Your father drew the map. You built the road.
He laid the foundation. We finished the walls.
The drift was retimbered with cedar. The red arrow was no longer a warning. In town, they called it the Reeves lode. Respect had replaced the whispers.
Next year, the second drift. The deep vein is waiting.
Vernon cleared the new shaft himself. His hands had blisters now. Not guilt. By summer's end, the boy they cast out paid wages to the men who stole his name. The winter that tried to kill him left a story longer than silver. One cloudless summer morning, Daniel Reeves walked out of the mine and stopped at the threshold. The red arrow on the rock had faded to a rust-brown ghost, but the timber was new and strong. Behind him, Frank pushed a loaded ore cart, his miner's hands steady and sure. Vernon followed, a heavy beam across his shoulder, his face unreadable, but his presence no longer hostile.
Nobody calls it a death trap now. They just call it the Reeves lode.
He looked out across the valley, the town, the road, the ridge, and saw a landscape that had once wanted him gone. The boy who had stumbled into this darkness with nothing but a thin coat now held the deed, the silver, and the silence of a mountain that had chosen him. And for the first time in a year, he stood without urgency, just a young man in the earth that had kept him alive. The three of them moved without speaking, a rhythm born of necessity and something beyond forgiveness. The camera lingers on the entrance, the red arrow, the timber, and the silhouette of Daniel Reeves, owner of the mountain, age 17. Freeze. The Reeves lode operated for 30 more years. Silver came out of the mountain every season. Daniel never forgot the winter that taught him the earth's secret, that warmth could be constant, even when the world froze. The family never fully healed. The wounds were too deep, the betrayal too old, but they stayed together, bound by blood, by work, and by the mine that had been a death trap and became a home. The deed remained in the Reeves family, a piece of paper that survived a blizzard and outlasted a lie. And the red arrow stayed too, faded into the rock. No longer a warning, just a mark, a reminder of the boy who walked into the mountain with nothing and came out the owner of everything. The stone never stopped giving its warmth, and the Reeves family never gave up the claim. Fade to black on the mountain that saved a boy, and the boy who refused to die. End of story.